Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the morning meeting. The air in conference room B was too still, too expectant. My seat at the long table was still empty, as usual, third from the left, directly in line with Cole's end of the table. But the eyes, those were different. Normally, people were half-scrolling their phones, whispering about office gossip. Today, no one said a word, just eyes. I sat down, adjusted my notepad, smoothed my skirt. I'd been in this office for 18 years, from the days we shared desk phones and dialed long-distance clients with a prayer. I knew this place better than I knew my own apartment, and yet, today, it didn't feel familiar. It felt like a stage, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. Cole, my manager, if you could still call him that, stood at the head of the table, fingers resting dramatically on a folder. He looked like a man about to make a statement he'd practiced all night. His eyes flicked toward Kevin Langston, leaning against the back wall like a bored teenager in a waiting room. Kevin, the 25-year-old son of the new CEO, always around, never doing anything useful. I'd watched him spend the last month wandering through departments like a trust fund intern, making vague comments about synergy and rebranding potential. Everyone tolerated him because his last name bought him immunity. Cole cleared his throat. "Thanks for coming, everyone. I'll get right to it," he said, his voice smoother than usual, rehearsed. "As part of our restructuring and integration efforts under Mr. Langston's new vision, we've made some changes." I didn't move. Neither did anyone else. Effective immediately, Sophie Caldwell will be reassigned from her current role in strategic operations to the executive assistant team. Specifically, she'll support Mr. Kevin Langston in a personal assistant capacity. There was a pause, not for effect, for absorption, for the silence to stretch across the room like fog. Cole glanced at his notes, then continued. "This reassignment comes with a compensation adjustment, standard for role realignment. Sophie's new salary will reflect a 45% reduction. Benefits remain unchanged." The only sound in the room was the humming of the HVAC and the slow tap of someone's pen. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for the explosion, for me to cry, shout, walk out. I did none of those things. Instead, I nodded slightly, took a small breath, and stayed quiet. Because this wasn't the first time I'd been blindsided in a boardroom. I'd survived reorgs, layoffs, hiring freezes, leadership refreshes. I'd watched less qualified men get promoted over me, watched my ideas get co-opted, repackaged, and applauded by people who wouldn't know a strategy if it bit them in the budget forecast. Cole watched me like I was a lab rat who hadn't reacted to the expected shock. "Sophie," he said, almost tentative, "do you have any questions?" I looked him dead in the eye. "No." My silence wasn't agreement. It was precision. It was the silence of someone who knew that speaking now would just feed the script they wanted to write about me. Ungrateful, emotional, unstable. But I was none of those things. I was ready. That evening, I walked out of the office without a single extra step. I didn't stop at my coworkers' desks or accept the awkward invitations to decompress over cheap wine. I didn't need sympathy. I needed quiet. At home, I made tea, poured half of it down the sink, changed into my old college sweatshirt, and sat at the kitchen counter with my laptop. I opened the folder I'd quietly maintained for months, back when Kevin's invoices started coming through finance with strange descriptions and round numbers. I wasn't looking for anything then, just following a hunch, a line item here, a weird timestamp there, payments to companies that didn't seem to exist 6 months ago, the kind of vendors that only show up when someone wants to hide money in plain sight. One name showed up again and again. Cole, authorizing payments, bypassing compliance reviews, always tied to Kevin's innovation campaigns. I knew what I had. So at 11:48 p.m., I composed the email. To Financial Inspectorate at fedwatch.org subject, anonymous report, suspicious internal payments. Attached, 17 files. Message. This report contains detailed documentation of financial transactions and vendor payments issued by Langston Group, signed by Cole Hammond and linked to Kevin Langston. Amounts exceed standard operating procedure thresholds. Cross-referenced files and timestamps included. No emotion, no plea, just facts. At 11:53, I clicked send. Not because I wanted revenge, because some systems only respond when you hit them in the wallet. This was the first move. The next morning, they'd all still think I was Kevin's assistant. They had no idea what was coming. Kevin's office, or rather, the office they gave us, had no windows. Just 4 walls and a fake plant that leaned sideways like it was trying to escape. There was one desk, which he claimed immediately, and a small round table with 2 chairs that had probably been stolen from the HR lounge. He wore designer sneakers with his suit and called me Soph before I had a chance to correct him. On the first morning, he spilled iced coffee on the keyboard and laughed like it was a joke we were both supposed to find charming. "I'm kind of a chaos person," he said. "Keeps things interesting." I said nothing. I was already taking notes. By day 3, he started scheduling supplier meetings he didn't understand. He mixed up codes, swapped out legitimate vendors with new partners who hadn't been properly vetted. When I pointed it out quietly, he waved it off. "Stuff like this happens, no big deal." In the next meeting, he repeated that line with a laugh. "I totally messed up the codes. Classic me, right?" Everyone laughed. Of course they did. When your last name's on the building, even incompetence becomes personality. I watched silently as he dodged responsibility and turned every fumble into a punchline. But I knew what those supplier codes actually represented. I tracked the changes, backdated the invoices, noted which files were altered and who signed them. Then came the quarterly strategy deck, the one I had written, weeks of research, trend forecasting, risk mapping, data that took me nights to pull and verify. I formatted every chart, wrote every insight in language simple enough for Kevin to read aloud without tripping over it, and he did. In front of the executive team, he stood there with his signature smirk and said, "I really wanted to rethink how we approach Q3 expansion, so I put this together." He didn't even blink. No mention of my name, no nod of credit, just slide after slide of my words coming out of his mouth. I didn't react, didn't flinch. But under the table, my hand opened the file on my tablet, the original version, with my signature embedded at the bottom of the last page, and a timestamp from the day before he even asked me for input. I emailed it to myself. Subject line: Primary author, Q3 Strat Deck, timestamped. Each of Kevin's mistakes, each stolen idea, each smirking deflection, they weren't insults anymore. They were bricks. Quiet, heavy bricks I was stacking one by one. He was building his castle on a foundation of theft. I was building something else entirely. The day he forwarded a confidential pricing list to the wrong supplier, one we were negotiating with, I flagged it in the system and quietly saved a copy of the email thread. He said, "Whoops, first week glitch." The VP of Operations chuckled. "He's learning fast, though." I learned faster. I saved everything. By the end of the month, Kevin had a growing reputation as a disruptor. Interns followed him around like he was teaching them something. All he taught them was that confidence beats competence in rooms full of enablers. He didn't notice that I was always one step behind him, watching, documenting, timestamping. This wasn't about revenge. It was about precision. He didn't know it yet, but every time he took credit for something he didn't do, he gave me another receipt. And one day, those receipts would speak for themselves. The humiliation wasn't subtle. It was Thursday. The office was sluggish with post-lunch apathy. I was at my desk, technically Kevin's desk, though he hadn't been in since noon, reviewing supplier discrepancies he'd accidentally signed off on. That's when Cole walked in. Not a knock. No eye contact. Just his voice, sharp and loud enough for the nearby team to hear. "Sophie," he said, like he was announcing a task to a temp. "Can you go down to the lobby and get us some coffee? Kevin wants his oat milk thing, and I'll have a black. Make it quick. We've got a 2:00. I looked up, slowly. The room quieted. He knew what he was doing. So did everyone else. Cole wasn't just giving me a task. He was making a point. I'd once run the operational backbone of this department. I'd closed million-dollar gaps in logistics with nothing but a spreadsheet and 4 hours of sleep. Now I was being ordered to fetch coffee. I stood, straightened my blazer, said nothing. As I walked past the printer, I heard them. Whispered, just loud enough. From boss to cleaning lady. She should have quit when the restructure hit. Can you believe she's still here? Every syllable was a paper cut, clean, quiet, accumulative. But I didn't stop walking. Outside, the wind hit harder than expected. I blinked into it, clutching the drink tray. My hands shook slightly, not from the cold. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was something else, something smaller, more breakable. By the time I got back, Kevin had forgotten he'd asked for anything. He was laughing at some meme on his phone. Cole took the coffee without a thank you and continued his conversation with a junior analyst about leadership branding. I returned to my desk, put on my headphones, and stared at my screen. But I couldn't hear the music, just the rush of blood in my ears. My heart had sunk somewhere deeper than embarrassment. At 5:47 p.m., I left the office. The train ride home was a blur of advertisements and strangers. When I opened the door to our apartment, the smell of pasta hit me first. My daughter, Emma, was at the table, markers everywhere, face smudged with blue ink. "Hi, Mama," she said brightly. "Look what I made you." She held up the drawing with both hands, proud as ever. It was me, in a cape, flying above a building with the words Langston Company written in blocky red letters. My cartoon self had glasses, a fierce smile, and lightning bolts coming out of her hands. Written across the top, in her careful, crooked handwriting, "My mom is a superhero." I knelt next to her, taking it gently. "You won't let them treat you like that, right?" she said seriously. "You're the smartest person I know." Her words sliced deeper than anything I'd heard that day, because she believed them, because she didn't know what I had allowed them to do to me. I smiled, kissed her forehead, and tucked the drawing into my bag. I didn't cry in front of her. Not yet. That night, after she fell asleep watching cartoons on the couch, I sat in the dark living room with my laptop on my knees. And I began. One by one, I pulled everything. Every report, every signed invoice, every altered document, internal messages, access logs, presentation revisions, the original supplier database from before Kevin got involved, the finance records Cole had approved, even after I flagged irregularities. I archived everything, backed it up to multiple encrypted drives, sent copies to an account they didn't know existed. I wasn't rushing. There was no anger in my clicks, just calm, precision, purpose. Every insult they threw at me, every task they thought was beneath me. It all added up to this moment. They thought they were breaking me, but they were wrong. They were sharpening me. Suspicion, in our line of work, usually starts with numbers. It was buried in the back end of a procurement update, just another PDF attached to Kevin's weekly dispatch. But I saw it. A routine office supply contract, normally clocking in at $42,000 for the quarter, had suddenly ballooned to $129,000. Same items, same quantities, triple the price. I double-checked the vendor name, Orion Creative Supplies, LLC. I didn't recognize it, so I pulled the vendor file. A quick check in the internal database showed it had only been approved 2 weeks ago. Contact person, Darren Stroud. I knew that name, not from any procurement file, but from Kevin's Instagram stories. His boy since day one, the guy who once got kicked out of a company retreat for networking with the VP's assistant. This wasn't just sloppiness anymore. This was theft with a smile. I documented everything, compiled a full report, copies of the contract, comparative invoices, supplier logs, screenshots from the financial system showing the timestamp of Kevin's approval. I filed the report through the official channel, the company's internal fraud monitoring portal. Flagged it urgent high-value discrepancy. I didn't expect applause, but I expected procedure. Instead, the next day, my report was gone. When I checked the submission archive, there was a file under my name, but it wasn't mine. It had been cleaned up, stripped of attachments. The discrepancy listed as noted and resolved. All references to Darren Stroud were gone. In its place, a note. Reviewed by compliance lead. No irregularities. Except we didn't have a compliance lead anymore. She'd been laid off in the last restructure. The system had worked against me. I stared at the screen, breath shallow. I wasn't shocked. Not really. But it was the moment I stopped hoping anyone inside this building would save me. And that's when it happened. A door left open. That evening, Kevin stormed out early, cursing at his laptop. Something about a calendar sync glitch. He didn't log off. Didn't even close the browser window. Just grabbed his coat and muttered about happy hour. I waited 5 minutes. Then I walked over and sat at his desk. Still logged in. Still admin-level access. I took a breath and started. I opened the back-end system logs. Downloaded everything. IP addresses, login timestamps, document edit histories, screenshots of file replacements, internal routing paths for procurement approvals. The original version of my report, archived but hidden under a false directory name. I found it. Then I went deeper. I traced the access trail back to Cole's account. He'd manually replaced the report file 3 hours after I submitted it. I didn't panic. I moved methodically, carefully, like someone defusing a bomb with gloves on. By 7:42 p.m., I had everything. I copied it all to an encrypted drive, one I kept in the lining of my old briefcase, the one they never searched. And then I named the folder. She. Not an acronym, just a word. Short for what Emma called me in her drawing. Superhero evidence. For her, for every woman they underestimated, for every assistant they dismissed, for every strategist forced into silence. They thought I was finished. But I had just begun. By the end of that week, I was more archivist than assistant. Each evening, I returned home with the calm of someone watching a fire smolder beneath polished wood floors. The house hadn't collapsed yet, but I could already hear the beams groaning. I sat at my kitchen table long after Emma went to bed, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound besides the soft clicks of my keyboard. The encrypted drive sat beside me like a co-pilot, and on the screen, the beginning of something vast and precise. I was building a map. Not the kind made of roads and cities, but one built on fraud and omission, a forensic atlas of falsifications. It started with a simple chart, file names, modification dates, signatories. Then came the overlays. I cross-referenced vendor files with approval timestamps, highlighted where contracts had been altered, often minutes after Kevin or Cole accessed them. Sometimes, entire vendor addresses changed. Other times, a 0 quietly appeared in the final line total. I documented every inconsistency, captured screenshots of before and after edits, extracted metadata that showed who logged in from which IP address and when. I even noted the times when files were opened but not saved, likely reviewed before someone decided whether or not to cover their tracks. And the beauty of it? The system I once built, the very framework that powered our internal tools, still bore my fingerprints. Kevin didn't know it, but the permission logic, the failover redundancies, the timestamp layering, those were mine. I had built the system with transparency in mind. And now, that same transparency was turning every door into a window, every closed file into a spotlight. I wasn't seeking revenge. That word always felt theatrical. Vengeful people burn things down. I was recording, preserving, documenting, because one day someone would ask how this happened. And when they did, I wouldn't offer theories or outrage. I would offer proof. On Thursday night, I created an internal timeline, 83 entries and counting, each tied to a contract, an altered PDF, a faked approval, or a financial signature that shouldn't have been there. I backed it all up to a second encrypted drive, a mirror, in case the first ever disappeared. I named it She. _V2 and stashed it inside an old makeup kit in my bathroom drawer. Emma's superhero drawing watched me from the fridge. Just before midnight, I shut the laptop. That's when I saw it. A white envelope slipped under my door. No address, no name. Inside, one sentence printed in plain, bold font. You are being watched. Be careful. No logo, no return address, nothing traceable. For a moment, I just stared at it. Not fear, not even surprise. Just confirmation. Of course they were watching. Someone had noticed the pattern, the late nights, the quiet downloads, the audit flags I'd triggered just enough to look like oversight. They knew something was off, and that meant I was close. I didn't call anyone, didn't email the anonymous HR line they pretended was confidential. I simply closed the blinds, powered down the main laptop, and opened a separate machine I hadn't used since the restructure, a shell device I'd configured with its own isolated environment. From there, I resumed. More careful, more quiet, more surgical. I stopped using company Wi-Fi, started saving locally, avoided touching my regular user account during office hours. I worked in shadows now, but not out of fear, out of precision. They were watching? Let them. The truth doesn't vanish because someone sees you holding it. It just becomes harder to deny. And soon, they'd see more than shadows. They'd see the map. The email landed at 6:41 a.m. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee, watching the city blink awake through my kitchen window when the notification buzzed across my screen. Subject: Urgent. External audit begins Monday. From Corporate Compliance Task Force. To all department heads. The message was short, clinical, but its weight was seismic. Due to recent concerns regarding internal financial discrepancies, an external audit will commence next Monday. Please prepare all documentation relevant to your department's contracts, vendor engagements, and procurement approvals from the last fiscal year. There it was, the door I didn't dare hope for. By 8:05 a.m., the office felt like a hornet's nest. Phones were ringing. Managers were in glass rooms, gesturing wildly. The printer queue was clogged with overdue reports suddenly needed yesterday. People whispered in the halls like there'd been a death. And in a way, there had. The death of the illusion that no one was watching. At 9:13 a.m., Kevin burst into the office. No oat milk latte, no swagger. Just a thin sheen of panic on his forehead and a folder gripped too tightly. "Sophie," he said, loud and sharp, like he was pulling a fire alarm. "I need everything. Every vendor file, contract, approval, invoice, Q3, Q4 projections. All of it. They'll want full access." He was pacing as he spoke, hands jittery, voice too high. "I'll need you to organize it all. Format it. Make sure it's clean. I don't want them digging into random things and getting confused, you know?" He stopped, looked at me. "You can do that, right?" I nodded once. "Of course," I said. Calm. Even. And he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a year. "Great," he said, and dropped the folder on my desk like it was a ticking bomb he didn't want to hear anymore. He thought I would save him, and in a way, I would. But not the way he expected. By 10 a.m., I had begun assembling the documents, but not just as a formality. Each file I submitted was a breadcrumb. Every purchase order with a bloated line total. Every contract with a consulting firm tied to Kevin's old fraternity brother. Every timestamp that showed Cole authorizing payments after hours. And I didn't alter a single one. I presented them clearly, honestly, transparently, because I no longer had anything to protect. The more Kevin begged for polish, the cleaner I delivered. Pristine files that revealed the rot. I didn't have to fabricate a thing. They had done that part for me. By 3 p.m., I had built a comprehensive digital binder, labeled, indexed, cross-referenced. Every document told a story. Every timestamp whispered the truth. And as I clicked through the final folder, something settled in my chest. Not fear, not satisfaction, but clarity. This wasn't just my duty. It was my chance. For years, I'd been the woman in the background. The one who built the systems, cleaned the messes, translated chaos into strategy, quietly, invisibly. But now the lights were on. The stage was set, and I held the script. Next Monday, when the auditors arrived, they wouldn't find a company prepared to defend itself. They would find a house of mirrors, every reflection pointing back to the truth I had already documented. They thought they had demoted me to an assistant, but they had given me the keys to every room. And now, I was opening every door. It happened on Friday. Mid-afternoon. I was finishing the final folder for the audit prep, double-checking file hashes for consistency. Kevin had stopped checking in. Cole had gone suspiciously silent, but I was used to silence. It wasn't the absence of noise that unnerved me. It was the shape it took. At 2:14 p.m., a new document appeared in the internal compliance folder. It hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier. The file was titled, Internal Risk Alert, Unauthorized Access Report. Caldwell S. I opened it. A neatly written report, unsigned, claiming I had breached admin-level protocols. It alleged I accessed sensitive systems without permission, that I manipulated audit trails and viewed protected documents beyond my clearance. No hard evidence, just flagged metadata, vague citations, and language designed to sound like policy violations. The kind of document that doesn't prove anything, but suggests everything. And the most chilling part? It had already been CC'd to legal, HR, and the audit committee. They were trying to strike first. Someone had seen what I was doing. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to know I had been digging. Enough to want to make me the villain before Monday rolled around. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I heard it. A quiet voice just behind my chair. "Don't respond." I turned. It was Johnny, one of the junior IT analysts, mid-20s, hoodies and earbuds and ramen packet lunches, the kind of employee no one ever noticed. But I had, once, when he fixed a permissions glitch in the vendor database I built years ago. He slid into the seat beside me like he was troubleshooting something, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw your logs," he said. "The report's fake." My heart stopped. He kept his eyes on the screen, typing something innocuous. "They're trying to force a narrative, flag you before the audit hits, but I've seen the metadata. You didn't breach anything. Someone elevated your user profile for one session, after hours, probably hoping you wouldn't notice." I stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. Johnny smiled, barely. "Because you're right, about everything, the contracts, the payments. I've seen the IP traces. Cole's been rerouting files through a dummy review node since last quarter." He paused, then added, "People think no one's watching, but some of us are. We just didn't know someone would actually do something about it." I felt something shift inside me. All this time I'd been alone, moving like a ghost in the system, thinking no one noticed, no one cared. But I had been wrong. Not everyone was complicit. Some were just waiting for someone to stand up so they'd know it was safe to speak. Johnny leaned closer. "Just be careful. They're scared now. That's when people like them get reckless." He handed me a flash drive. "What's this?" I asked. "System logs, clean copies, before they started altering them." Then, just as quietly, he stood. "Your daughter's right, you know," he said without looking back. "You are a superhero." And he was gone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the drive in my hand. The story they were trying to write about me had just been interrupted. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't just feel prepared. I felt powerful. Because now, I wasn't alone. Monday morning arrived with the tension of a courtroom. The auditors came in pairs, dressed in charcoal gray blazers and expressions that gave nothing away. They didn't speak unless necessary. They didn't smile. But they carried the kind of authority that made managers nervous and executives visibly shrink. Kevin didn't show up until after 10 a.m. His excuse? Family emergency. But I saw the fear in his eyes, like someone walking into a room where they already knew the verdict. By noon, the halls were quiet, not from absence, but from anticipation. Emails stopped. Phone calls dropped to whispers. No one wanted to be the one called into a meeting with the audit team. At 1:33 p.m., they came to me. 2 auditors. One younger man with a digital tablet, the other a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and a memory that, it turned out, ran deeper than I expected. "Miss Caldwell," she said, "we need your help locating several procurement records that appear to be missing from the main archive." She didn't say it, but her tone told me everything. They were finding holes, and someone was going to fall into them. I nodded calmly and opened the mirrored archive I'd kept backed up for weeks. "These files were here before," I said, scrolling through the index. "They weren't deleted, just relocated to a hidden review node, likely masked under admin credentials." The younger auditor raised an eyebrow. "You traced that?" "Yes." I pulled up the access logs, walking them through the timeline, when the documents had been edited, moved, renamed, and in some cases, entirely replaced. We found them all, every forged file, every padded invoice, every falsified approval. And then we reached one I hadn't expected. It was a Q3 marketing analytics report, one I'd written, drafted, formatted, and finalized weeks before Kevin even knew what a conversion rate was. But this version had his name on it, signed electronically. The data, the language, the model structure, all unmistakably mine. But the signature at the bottom? Kevin Langston. I stared at it for a moment before I spoke. "That document is mine," I said, voice steady. "I created it. The original was submitted under my account. This one is a copy, altered. His name was added after the final version was exported." The older auditor studied me, quiet for a beat too long. "You built the reporting framework too, didn't you?" she asked. I blinked. "Yes, 5 years ago." "I thought I recognized your name," she said. "You consulted with us on vendor reconciliation back in 2020. That quarterly review, you caught a cascading error the board missed." I nodded slowly. "I remember." She tapped her pen once on the desk. Her eyes narrowed, but not with suspicion, with focus. "And you're saying the data in this version was presented under someone else's name?" "Yes, but I kept the original," I said, sliding a USB drive across the table, with the timestamp, metadata, and internal message logs requesting review. The room was silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. She inserted the drive into her laptop. The younger auditor leaned in. As the original document opened, her expression didn't change, not visibly. But something shifted in the room. The truth wasn't in my tone. It was in the numbers. They didn't lie. Not like people. Not like signatures. For the next 2 hours, I worked beside the auditors, not as a suspect, not even as an employee, but as someone who understood the system better than anyone else, because I had built it. And now, I was helping it speak. The summons came at 4:12 p.m. A message from the CEO's assistant, short, formal, and urgent. "Mr. Langston would like to speak with you. Now." I knew this moment would come. Eventually, they always look for the one person who can fix the mess they created. I walked the long corridor to the executive floor, past the glass walls, where half the senior staff now sat in silence. Audit interviews had drained the building of its usual false cheer. The doors were half open, but no one looked up. Whispers had died out. The storm had already passed. They were just counting the damage. Inside the corner office, Richard Langston stood behind his desk, arms folded, tie loosened. He looked smaller than he did in the photos, not in stature, in certainty. He didn't speak at first, just studied me like a puzzle he wasn't sure how to solve. Finally, he said, "Why didn't you come to me?" I raised an eyebrow. "You were here every day," he said. "You knew. You saw what was happening. Why stay silent?" I met his eyes. "I did speak," I said quietly. "You didn't listen." There was no anger in my voice, no righteousness, just truth, bare, unpolished, undeniable. I stepped forward and placed a folder on his desk. A simple file, no dramatics, just a proposal titled System Recovery Plan, Langston Group, submitted 17 months ago, author Sophie Caldwell. He looked at it, but didn't open it. "You had this ready?" I nodded. "You asked us to bring solutions," I said. "I did. Cole shelved it. Kevin ignored it." I paused. "You weren't listening then. You're listening now because the numbers are louder than I am." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth had already spoken, in disappearing files, forged signatures, and a trail of data that couldn't be rewritten. "I assume I'm dismissed," I added, more as a courtesy than a question. He looked down. No denial, just silence. I picked up my bag, the same one I'd carried for 18 years. It held no souvenirs, just my drive, my daughter's superhero drawing, and the dignity they never managed to take from me. As I turned to go, I heard him ask, almost too quietly, "Why now?" I paused at the door. "Because now the silence finally had weight," I said, and I knew exactly where to place it. Then I walked out, not triumphant, not vengeful, just finished. There was no applause, no hallway slow clap, just the soft sound of my heels on polished floors. I left no resignation letter, no parting words, because I had said everything I needed to, In files, in proofs, in decisions. This wasn't revenge. This was resolution. And I didn't need to stay to witness the fallout. I already knew how it would end.